The invaders march south to Issus in modern-day Turkey. Alexander's troops are outnumbered by Darius's army. But this is exactly the kind of challenge Alexander relishes.
Alexander's ability to adapt is really the mark of a great general. Greatest generals in military history are able to do that. He was able to see the situation in a sweep of the eye and then come up with a plan that would overcome the obstacles that would stymie any other commander.
Alexander quickly sizes up his enemy. The infantry are protected by archers, a sure sign Darius has no faith in his foot soldiers. Alexander makes his first move, using one of the most powerful weapons in his arsenal, the weapon of fear.
They're not watchers of drama for nothing. Utterly terrifying. They'd clash their shields, spears would move from side to side, and they'd walk forwards for the final bit with the incredible, chilling, endless roar of "ah-la-la-la-la, as they came up, terrifying.
Alexander charges into the river and up the opposite bank. In the ensuing chaos, the Persian left flank collapses. In an almost photographic image, this monumental battle is captured in a mosaic from Pompeii. It is presumed to be a faithful copy of a painting from the late 4th century BC. When Alexander finally comes face to face with his nemesis Darius, he first spears Darius's bodyguard. All around Alexander are Persian soldiers filled with terror and fear. Faced with an unstoppable avenger, Darius flees.
Well, when the Persian army sees its king, the great king, the Shah, running away like that, what are the rest of them to think? There's an incredible psychological impact of that kind of a moment upon the Persians. And as soon as that happens, the battle is won.
Still, Alexander is ruthless. By the end of the day, more than 50,000 Persians lay dead.
There's no doubt Alexander loved killing. His favourite daily pursuit is hunting. And here we're talking about real hunting. He goes in alone, unarmoured, against lions. Gosh, heavens, can you imagine it? It's just to keep fit for the days when he's attacking men.
But behind this bloodthirsty killer is a cunning mind. Alexander, like any modern-day politician, understands the importance of image and publicity. He is determined to become a legend in his own time. On the campaign, he brings along his own personal historian and paid spin doctor, Callisthenes.
Callisthenes' role in Alexander's campaign was to act as the publicity agent, the official PR representative. And it seems fairly clear that as Alexander marched along, what Callisthenes was doing was sort of pounding out these reports from the front. So he was kind of like the embedded journalist for Alexander's campaign.
After the Battle of Issus, Alexander and his army advanced down the coast of modern-day Lebanon. Most cities surrendered, but the island of Tyre resists.
Alexander's attitude toward defiance was either join me or die.
Alexander begins what would become the longest and most brutal siege of his campaign. After 7 grueling months, when the walls are finally breached, 7,000 Tyrians are killed and 30,000 enslaved. To prove a point to other cities that might resist, he has 2,000 Tyrian fighters crucified.
When he was finished, he allowed the bloodlust of his men to run loose and killed virtually every male inhabitant of the fortress. It was an awful display of brutality, but it was also very effective in showing to any other potential enemies what could happen if they resisted.
In another savage siege, this time at Gaza, Alexander's army kills every man in the city.
From a military perspective, he did everything right, or nearly everything. And there's so much to emulate in his generalship. But there was a dark side to Alexander as well, and he was brutal, and he fought for glory. And many of the things that we would consider the worst traits of humanity were manifest in Alexander as well.
Alexander is merciful if his enemies surrender, but cruel if he is opposed. The governor of Gaza, Battus, is defiant to the bitter end. Alexander reveals his cruel side when he punishes Battus. He has him tied with rope, dragged around the city until he dies. It is a familiar scene taken from the pages of Homer's Iliad. Achilles has his arch-rival Hector dragged around the walls of Troy. But in that version, Hector was already dead.
Alexander was brutal. He refined the art of brutality to the highest level. And that is what created his success in many cases. He could not have conquered the way he did had he not resorted to brutal tactics.
With a string of savage victories under his belt, Alexander is ready to take on Egypt, one of the greatest empires the world has ever seen. The Egyptian pharaohs were seen as living gods and built massive pyramids, temples, and monuments as testaments to their glory. If the Greeks were dazzled by Egyptian culture, Alexander was even more impressed and obsessed by the notion that a great ruler could also be a god. After 2 years of warfare, Alexander marches inland to Memphis. The Egyptians are eager to see their Persian rulers defeated. They surrender without a fight and welcome Alexander with open arms. Under his rule, Egypt's religious and cultural practices are still allowed. In return, the Egyptian priests give Alexander the title of Pharaoh. It marks a profound turning point. For it is here that Alexander began to believe he was truly a living god. In 331 BC, Alexander sets off on an epic journey to visit the oracle at Siwa. He is seeking proof of his divine existence.
It was about 300 miles. The approach to Siwa would have been on a plateau, relatively flat land, but sand dunes all around. The oracle was a well-known destination. There would have been a path, but the path could easily become obscured. You would have a situation where you would have searing heat during the day, incredible cold at night. A sandstorm could come up very quickly where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face.
Alexander and his men do become lost after a terrible sandstorm. But legend has it that two birds saved them by guiding the group to their destination, the extraordinary oasis of Siwa and the temple of Zeus Ammon.
Well, that visit to the oracle, this is one of the most fascinating episodes really in the whole history of the ancient world. I think the question is, had Alexander in some way already masterminded a bit of a publicity exercise that he was the son of Zeus?
Alexander enters the temple alone while his men wait outside.
Here we have Alexander. He's a young man in his early 20s. He's already accomplished incredible things. And he's in a place where suddenly he's being treated, at least by the native Egyptians, as a god on earth. And you have to ask yourself, what is he thinking? I mean, he's certainly a long way from Macedonia at this point.
Alexander came out of the temple. They all rushed forward and said, Alexander, Alexander, what did you ask? And he said, I'm not saying that. And he said, but we heard him call you the son of Zeus. And he said, all right, you can go with that story if you want. And it became then publicized by his publicist, and Alexander was allowed this version of his identity to spread because it, I think, picked up with previous suspicions on his part, possibly beginning from the stories of his mother, that he was somehow more than human.